Good morning. Good morning to you all. You're welcome back to our session on research methods. I wish you a happy Easter, and I trust you are doing well with your family. The last time we met, we talked about doing literature review, where we discussed the different types of literature review. No, we didn't discuss the different types. We discussed how to find the literature, if I remember very much, how to find the literature, and we also discussed where you can locate the literature. I also demonstrated to you how to use academic databases to be able to identify literature. Today, I'm supposed to teach you how to be able to draw the research gap from the literature you have been able to obtain. And I'll do that one, and I'll also continue on by teaching you how to write if there is time. So those are the two things I'm going to do today. I'll try my best as possible to showcase how to be able to find obtain a research gap and a research gap from an academic piece of work that you have. That's an academic article that you have downloaded. And then we will also learn how to be able to write. Maybe we may begin how to be able to write, might not be able to end, but these are things that we'll try to do today. I trust that we'll have able to have a good time today, and then you can learn many new things. Okay, so let me share my slides for today with you. Let me share my slides for today with you. I've muted everybody so that we could actually focus today on learning from what I'm coming to teach. Then, if you have a question, you can type it within the Zoom group chat, or you can actually raise your hand within the reactions screen so that I could actually pause and then answer your question. So that's what we'll do today. So as I mentioned earlier, last time we met, we discussed defining literature review, identifying and locating literature. Today, what we'll try to do is to go forward and look at research gaps and topic selection. Research gaps and topic selection. Okay. Remember, we defined literature review as a synthesis of available resources and materials with a strong relation to the topic in question, accompanied by a description and a comparative analysis of each work. And we try to explain that the definition of literature review try to tell us the process of literature review, because every literature review starts from a topic that you have. When you have a topic, then you are able to select the right materials and then to do the synthesis. Okay. We emphasize that we do the literature review to be able to establish the strong theoretical base which will substantiate the arguments that we put across. Whenever we are arguing in academia, we need to know what's the basis of the argument. And reading the literature helps us to be able to form our arguments and provide evidence for our arguments. Okay. So one thing we also emphasize is that the literature review helps us to identify gaps in knowledge. That's what we are going to do today. And then also demonstrate that our work will improve the field and our work will also differentiate our, what has been done previously from what we are going to do. So when we do a literature review, we are able to know what are the new things that are possible for us to carry out in this research endeavor. Okay. So with that, we ended up discussing the difference and the different steps in the literature review process. We discussed this, select and refine a topic, identify and locate literature, ensure relevance, record and retrieve, review and summarize. Okay. Then we went on to discuss where we can find the literature. And then I mentioned that scholarly journals tend to matter whenever you're looking for academic work. Scholarly journals have contemporary arguments which can enhance your discussions and can enhance your arguments, and you can establish better gaps if you read scholarly journals. Okay. I took you through the UG space to also show you the different types of academic databases that exist and the ones that are very good for business school students. F-School holds Emerald, Science Direct, Wiley, Tilly and Francis. We looked at them. I also mentioned of Google Scholar, if you do remember. Then from there, I went on to demonstrate to you how to register for off-campus access and how to identify and locate literature using advanced search, the appropriate way of saving your materials or the papers you have downloaded from the internet onto your computer, giving it intelligent naming system. I also told you about categorizing your literature into different class categories so that or classifications so that you can be able to easily identify them when you are using them for your academic work. I mentioned that you can create one folder and then in that you can create subfolders. And this is a spider diagram that can give you a very visual representation of how your folders will look like. Then from there, I told you that there's a way we can summarize our work by one page. And I showed that this is one way that you could use this article summary, one page article summary is a structure for summarizing your work. So you read one article and just try to identify the different aspects or dimensions of the article by summarizing it in this particular format. And I mentioned that in using this format, you actually just focus on what matters to you depending on the paper you are reading. Okay. So from there, I told you that you could go online and then to practice it on your own by downloading one paper and trying to summarize it. Okay. So now let's get into what we wanted to do, research gaps and topic selection. And when we began our session, I remember I mentioned that there are a number of factors that influence the choice of your topic. One of them being you, then because you are the one going to do the work. And I mentioned your supervisor, the data source, the sponsor, the society and trends and gaps in literature. Today, our focus is going to be on gaps in literature. Why gaps in literature tend to matter in every research endeavor that we are undertaking. Now, we define research gaps as discrepancies in existing literature which needs to be addressed. Now, or areas of study in academic work or academic literature where there are reasonable gaps in and that needs to be addressed. So usually whenever any person is doing carrying out a research work, he tries to point out that there is a gap. And in pointing out that a gap, he's able to tell us why he's doing the research. Let's take an example. I'm going to go to an academic paper that we downloaded some time ago and look at it. This paper is on, the paper title is Managing Stakeholder Communication, the Quailstock Festival Case. Okay, so if you look at it, it's a project management based on project stakeholder communication. So it starts by saying that project stakeholder communication is one of the focal parts of project management, aligning different objectives and interests and expectations. Let me zoom in a little bit so that we can all see. Aligning different objectives and interests and expectations of stakeholders directly contributes to the success of the project. Previous research on stakeholder management has mainly focused on conceptual development of stakeholder management tools and frameworks to improve management of stakeholders. Now he's talking about the existing research, the previous research. So look at it. The majority of research on stakeholder management has built tools and frameworks consistent with static perspective of projects, yet have paid less attention to how the relation between the focal project organization and its stakeholders changes over the project life cycle. Now, what he's trying to point out is that there is a gap in the literature. So if you look at it very carefully, you are reading the introduction of somebody's work and he has emphasized on the gap that is in his literature. And the gap being, I want to try and highlight this. The gap being that, the gap is emphasizing is here is that a number of different works on project stakeholder management, research that have been done in the area, have just proposed tools and frameworks, which usually look at the static perspective on projects. They just see projects as one particular activity. They don't look at projects from the focal point of the organization and the stakeholders changing over time. It means that project has a life cycle. So a project, however, moves to different phases, distinct phases over its life cycle. what it is emphasizing here, the current research in this area do not look at these distinct phases and how to manage stakeholder communication. So it goes to a project, however, moves through distinctive phases over its life cycle, thereby creating dynamic content for the management of stakeholders. This gap in the literature calls for research on stakeholder management that takes into account the project life cycle. So it is pointing out that there is a gap in the literature. So what I'm trying to emphasize here is that anytime you read academic work, especially in the introduction and the conclusion, you will find what we call research gaps. So we have seen one here in the introduction of the person's work. And look at what he says. He said, in this research, we address project stakeholder management by studying the modes of communication with project stakeholders. Now, what he has done is that furthermore, he had actually emphasized there's a need for us to do a research on stakeholder management. That is why he's doing the research. So the purpose of the research here is actually dependent on the gaps he found in the previous paragraph. The purpose of the research that he has mentioned here, we address project management by studying the modes of communication with project stakeholders, is based on the gap that he has emphasized here. The gaps that he has emphasized here. Now let me just scroll down and go again to the conclusion of the work and see that, okay. Now he has a whole section called limitations and future research. Now, I wish it emphasizes another set of that. A theory elaborating case study, such as the one utilized in this study, does not lead to validated theory, but it does provide empirical insights and theoretical ideas for future research. The empirical findings presented in this article are based on specific empirical context. Now he's going to say that future research could engage in collecting large-scale data from other empirical contexts to test the presented conclusions. So what he's just trying to emphasize is that on this whole section, he's trying to emphasize that future research should do something. So if somebody wanted to do research on project stakeholders, stakeholder communication or in project management, this is a very good section of the work to read so that you can know that the current research has been done, but what are the new research that is being emphasized or is being advocated for other researchers to do. This is what he's doing. So he mentions a number of them. Another one here, another type of gap he pointed here for future research. In the context of our study, utilizing modern ICT in stakeholder communications is still in its infancy. Now, he said stakeholder communication and ICT, using modern ICT in stakeholder communication is still in its infancy. This is 2015 when he said that. So, previous studies on cultural industry have presented similar conclusions. Because social media such as Facebook and LinkedIn can offer organizations and stakeholders with an effective tool for relationship building and networking, it could be crucial in success of festivals in the future. It was studying festivals, so he's trying to tell us that future projects which focus on festivals can consider how Facebook and LinkedIn actually mediates or influences stakeholder communication. That's what he's trying to say. So you see that further research could systematically assess the use and implication of such communication practices. So what you see here is that many authors who write good academic work in their conclusion or just before their conclusion usually state out what future research should do. And in their beginning, they also point out gaps that encourage them to do that particular research. So you see that gaps can be found in the beginning of a research and can also be found at the end of a research. Beginning of the research, the gaps tell us why the person is doing the research. At the end of the research, the gap tells us the gaps that he emphasizes there are future research directions for those who want to do research in that same area in the future. So now this is some of the things we are going to try to learn today. So I'm just using this one as an example for you to be able to understand that researchers always communicate research gaps within their academic papers. And you can find them by looking at the introduction and the conclusion sections of the research work that you are reading or you have downloaded from the internet. Okay, so let's go back to our slides. Okay. Okay. So we emphasize that research gaps tell us the discrepancies in the research that need to be addressed. Now, it also answers the following question: why should I read your work? Because you selected a research gap. That gap will inform your research purpose, like we just saw in the example. And because it's influencing your research purpose, it tells us why we should do research in a particular area. And also, it tries to tell us that how your work is different from somebody's work, so that we know that your work is not just duplicating somebody's research, but trying to present something new. Now, the same thing that happens here is the research gap also emphasizes the potential contribution of your research. So that when we read your work, we say, oh, okay, this is what we can learn from your work. This is what we can gain from your work. This is what new authors can be able to learn from the work that you actually done. And then we can also assess whether there's any potential value by you doing this work. We saw in the example earlier that the existing research on stakeholder communication has viewed projects as a static activity. By now looking at the fact that projects have got different phases. So the objective here is that he's trying to address that particular gap, where you look at how stakeholders communicate during the different phases of a project. Okay. Now, for me to continue, I need to explain the different types of gaps. Now, it's important for you to appreciate them because you're going to see different gaps in your research. And the different gaps will help you to appreciate the different ways that people write gaps or communicate gaps. First approach that authors use to communicate gaps is to focus on the issue that has received less attention in the literature. The issue that has received less attention in the literature. So, for example, somebody will point out that there's less research in a particular area. By doing that, he's emphasizing that there is an issue gap. So that means that he focuses on the concept. Like what we just saw right now is in the beginning was an issue gap. The fact that stakeholder communication has not received many, and the research on stakeholder communication has been focused on looking at projects as a static activity without looking at the fact that projects are dynamic and they go through the phases. It's an issue gap. It's an issue that he found in the literature, and he was told that there's less attention given to that issue. So whenever we see an issue gap, what we are going to see is that there is less attention given to that particular endeavor in research or that particular scope in research. Then the second type of gap we are going to see is the theory gap. A theory gap is usually emphasized when the existing theoretical frameworks or the existing approaches to addressing a particular issue seems to be less discussed or less represented in the literature. Seems to be less discussed or less represented in the literature. So in that scenario, you realize that somebody may have carried out research. And after carrying out the research, you end up realizing that the research itself was done in within a particular set of questions or set of factors. But the factors that he looked at does not address the research itself, and that leaves more room for research or leaves more room for discussion. Let me give an example. So there are different ways in which researchers look at things like technology adoption, like how people adopt a technology like a mobile phone. Now, there is a theory called the technology acceptance model that explains that the factor that influence the choice of a technology is the perceived usefulness and perceived ease of using the technology. So in case somebody wants to adopt a phone, he's going to look at to what extent will this phone be easy for me to use and how will this phone be useful to me. Now, this technology acceptance model has been used to explain a number of things, explain a number or research on a number of adoption phenomena, or trying to examine why people adopt a particular technology. But it was formulated way back in 1985 by a gentleman called Davis. But later on, other people came up and realized that this particular model is insufficient because sometimes people adopt a phone or adopt technology not because it's easy to use or it's useful, but because maybe a friend is using it. So there are social norms that can even, or social reference, reference, like people who refer you to it, who can actually, people end up adopting and use a particular form because somebody is using it, not just because it's useful to the person or because you want to fit into a particular societal class. So you want to be seen that he's one of the people who are using the latest iPhone. So because of that class and social capital that person desires, he goes to buy an iPhone. Not because the iPhone is affordable to the person, not because the iPhone is useful in terms of the functionality in the iPhone, or not because it's easy to use, just because he wants that social acceptance. So sometimes that social factor that subject a person to adopt a phone. Now, because of the fact that the initial theory said it is perceived use of use and perceived usefulness, it didn't look at the other factors which can be social. And that's why I'm saying that that means that anybody who carries out a research using the technology acceptance model is bound to end up looking at only two factors: the ease of use and then the perceived usefulness. And then the person may fail to look at the other factor, which is the social reference or social capital or other subjective norms coming from the society that can influence a person to use a phone. So in such a scenario, there is a gap in the theory if you use only the technology acceptance model in carrying out research. So sometimes it happens that people carry out research and they use a particular model, and the model seems to have been just skew our answers to only one particular perspective. I'm coming to your question, Ofewa. I fear I'm coming to your question. Then sometimes too, it could be the fact that the current approaches or the current ways we have been looking at the same thing is not giving us a better understanding. Let me give an example. Okay, you may use a particular model in existing research can use a particular model, but it gives us only some type of answers. If we want to look at other views, for example, if somebody is looking at factors that influence productivity in the workplace and just looks at only the economic factors, you may realize that those ones can be addressed, but there could be other factors such as the job design, the design of the job, the supervisory relationship. That has nothing to do with the amount of money the person is receiving. It has to do with the job and how the job is designed and how the supervisor and the subordinate or the employee and then the employer relationship is mutual. So if those ones, there's friction in there, that could also affect productivity in the workplace. So you could see that somebody may argue that all the existing research approach to looking at productivity at the workplace has been skewed to economic factors, but there are other social factors that has to do with the job design or even structural factor that has to do with supervisor relationship that needs to be looked into, and that could come from the fact that there's a theory gap. So that's what I'm trying to emphasize here. So there's a theory gap. Okay, now let me see what Efia was saying. Oferiwa. Okay, I've unmuted you. I thought you would type your question. So Oferiwa, please ask your question. Hello.
Sorry, yeah, good morning.
Yeah, good morning.
Can,
Oh. Very well. Please ask your
yeah,
question.
please, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear
Yeah,
you.
I was saying that it's difficult to draw a distinction between the issue gap and the theory gap. Because, for instance, the explanation you gave about somebody using technological approach to consider why people buy iPhones, I could say it's an issue gap. It's
I didn't say
difficult to
technological
draw
approach.
a line.
I said a technology acceptance model. So
Okay, so
yes, but what you are saying is true. When you say a technologically deterministic approach to address an issue, whilst not looking at the social dimensions of the issue, that could be one dimension of looking at it. But that technology approach is underpinned by the theory, the questions you were asking, the theory you were using. That's why it was narrow. So change the theory you are using. Use a better theory which is not narrow to only technology factors. And there are theories like that. Everybody understand me?
okay,
Yeah. For
yes,
example, when I teach you theories next in future, you understand what I mean. For example, there's a theory called the theory of planned behavior, which can also be used to understand why people behave a particular way or adopt a particular technology or use it. So the theory of planned behavior has three factors. It has one being the attitude of the attitude towards the behavior, such as adoption of the technology. And then number two, the subjective norms in the society that can subject the person. And number three, perceived behavioral control, an individual factor that can control the behavior, like income of the person. And then the norms could be either peer pressure or competitive pressure or even social pressure could be. And then the attitude can then come from either your perceived usefulness or your perceived use of use. Do you understand me? So in that particular model, it looks at it in a comprehensive manner, not just looking at just the uh, the technology factors. It's looking at other factors too, including income. Overall, I hope you understand me. Overall, I hope you understand me. Okay. Yes, okay then. Thank you. So let's continue. Good. So what she said is very true. Sometimes issue gaps can be confused with theory gaps. But as an MBA student, you don't go out looking for gaps and this is an issue gap or that's a theory gap. Usually you see PhD students and then MPhil students doing that. But the reason why I'm teaching you is that it helps you to see the different types of gaps and how they are formulated. Okay. Then you also have sometimes a method gap. A method gap can come from a number of different variables. One can be whether the current studies have focused on a particular method of research. Method being that either all the studies are too much quantitative and there's no qualitative study, or all the studies are too much qualitative and there's no quantitative study. So sometimes you can see that in research. Or if there's an advocacy for a longitudinal approach as compared to a cross-sectional study, which is like survey, they want a longitudinal over time or ethnographic research where it takes time to collect data, studying the culture of the people. Or it could also be the fact that the way the variable is measured. Let me give an example. The concept called trust is multidimensional, but sometimes people measure it as a unidimensional variable. Trust consists of benevolence, integrity, and competence. But sometimes when people are doing research, they look at it as trust as one variable. They don't break it into the subcomponents of trust. Now, if you do a research that has one seen as see trust as one composite variable, it will give its type of conclusion. However, if you are studying why some people trust, do people trust government, um, trust do like in post COVID-19 scenario, do people trust government reportage or government announcements to us, the daily briefing? Do people trust it? Now the question that comes is that what type of trust are you measuring? Are you looking at the integrity of the message being given or the person giving the message to us? Number two, are you looking at benevolence, the empathy is able to create within you? Or number three, are you looking at competence? For example, if they come and pick somebody who is just, I'm just using an example, who is a fisherman to come and give a briefing, and a person who is coming from as a medical doctor come and give you a briefing, who will you trust? Who will you end up giving, deeming the person is competent enough to give you a briefing on what is happening concerning COVID-19 in Ghana? You are most likely to believe the medical personnel than somebody who is a fisherman because of what competence. And that competence is an aspect of trust. So if you went out to actually just measure trust of people's trust, perceived trust concerning COVID-19 briefings, and you just didn't look at these dimensions, you would have just seen trust as a whole composite variable. And you will not be able to tell whether your trust you are talking about is it about benevolence, is it about integrity, or is it about competence? So a method gap can come from the way you even measure your variables. What kind of way measures you use for your variable and how you conceptualize your variable. So that I mentioned one. A method that can come from either there's a dominance of one approach in the research, whether it's quantitative, qualitative, or mixed methods, or the method that can come from whether we are using the way we measure a variable, whether the variable is a composite and we are measuring it as a multi-dimensional, we are measuring it as a composite variable, or even sometimes the perspective that we look at in terms of our respondents. Somebody does a study and then just looks at male male perspectives of the issue, doesn't look at female. So now you're realizing that you didn't look at the fact that females could also have a different view. Or somebody just look at gender as a whole and just that finish the study, but couldn't tell us that there could be gender differences in the phenomenon he studied. So you want to then go back and use gender as a moderator to see whether when males experience it, the occurrence of the phenomenon is higher than when females experience it. Let me give an example. Somebody did a research in Ghana concerning female entrepreneurship in tourism and realized that in Ghana, the tourism sector is the only place where they have more female entrepreneurs than male entrepreneurs. So if you didn't do a gender study and look at the differences in terms of who are the gender composition of entrepreneurs in the tourism sector in Ghana, no, the person couldn't have been able to share this finding. So please look at it in that particular perspective. It could come from either the way we measure the variable, or the way we conceptualize the variable, or the way we look at the methods, which particular method is being used, and the dominance of that method, or even the way we measure, the way we look at differences in terms of our moderators. Sometimes age can be a moderator, or sometimes even the size of a firm, like you're comparing firms in Ghana and you're comparing their response to COVID-19 COVID-19 strategies by government, or briefings by government, and you're looking at Ghanaian firms, the small size firms could react differently as compared to the large size firms. So you have to look at size could be a moderator in this particular scenario. Okay. So the next thing that we can say is a context gap. The context gap comes in when there's a geographic region that has been less discussed or less represented in literature. The other time that I met you, or even yes, I can just go. This is slide 27. So let's just go back and just check something. I just want to use this as an example. I don't know whether I have it here. Oh, it's in our previous class. It's in our previous class. So let me just continue. Okay, it's our previous class. It's in our previous class. I'll come back to it. Remember, we're reading Professor Abel's work, and we found out in Professor Abel's work that he was talking about corporate governance, and he said that corporate governance has been found to influence firms' performance. And he said that these empirical studies have tended to focus mainly on developed economies with inconclusive results. So it means that the studies have been too much on developed economies, and even that one has inconclusive results. And it also means that the developing economies have not received more research in that area. So that's a context gap, the geographic region. Then he went on to say that in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, he said finance financing, corporate governance has received less attention, especially when it comes to finance financing decisions. So all of these things point out there is a gap. And the gap has to do with the fact that there's a context gap. There's a context variation. Some countries have received more research in the area than as compared to another country, or some regions of the world have received more research in the area as compared to another region. Okay. Then the next one has to do with level of analysis gap. The level of analysis gap has to do with the fact that there are differences in the studies in terms of meta, macro, meso, and micro. Meta being the cross-country or cross-national studies, macro being the national level studies, meso being sometimes people say meso is the firm level, others also say meso is the industry level, and micro. When people use meso as the industry level, then the micro becomes their firm level. But when they use micro as the firm level, then when they use meso as the firm level, then micro becomes the individual level. So let's say micro can be individual or firm level, meso can be industry or firm level. Okay. So what he's trying to say here is that sometimes people don't want to do research because they want to look at the micro level, the level of the individual, maybe farmer, the study focused on farmers and how they respond to maybe poverty issues in the agricultural sector. But another person can actually do a study where he's not looking at just farmers, but look at cooperatives. So he moves away from the individual farmer to a cooperative or to firms, farm-based enterprises. So then that moves from the individual level to the firm level. Then somebody can also do a study and look at industries for the banking industry. So he may end up realizing that all the studies have been looked at too much on the financial industry. There is less study in the banking industry. So he's now pointing out that we should look at the banking industry. Then we can also have a a macro level where people will say that the current studies tell us unemployment and the factors that influence unemployment at the firm level, but they're not telling us the factors that influence on unemployment at the national level, or comparing two nations, comparing Ghana and Nigeria. What are the factors that influence unemployment? So that can then come at the cross country level. Let's look at the meta level. So sometimes gaps can be in different levels in terms of their operations and how they are communicated. Okay. Somebody is as a context gap solely geographically related. Hmm. Is for your level of study, I'll say yes. Because there's sometimes somebody people have something called domain gap. Domain gap has to do with the fact that it's also related to context. All the studies are in a particular domain. For example, looking all the studies are into the banking industry, and somebody is saying that there's a need for us to look at it at the finance in maybe agricultural industry. So now you look at the domain. The domain of the research has been in banking. There's a need for us to look at the different domains like hospitality or tourism. So that could also be at a domain level. So we call it the domain gap. But I've seen other people who may also call it a context gap. Okay. Please, these classifications, you may not see them in much in academic people's books. A few books that you see there is primarily will be my book. And I've seen one or two, I guess I've seen another one person who has also mentioned it, but because it's not something that is there like stated out. It is, I, after a number of research, trying to categorize them this way because it helps students to appreciate the different types of gaps that they are seeing. But some researchers gradually came to understand it. So people now use it a lot. Oh, it's a theory. Theory gap was there. Issue gap was there. Method gap was there, but people were not, quite a number of studies will not mention that it's a method gap. You not see it in research, there's an issue gap, method gap. Most of the time, they will just embody it in the discussion. You have to tease out and see that, oh, what he's talking about is about method issues, so it's a method gap. What he's talking about is about theoretical issues, a theory gap. What he's talking about is about the concept, so it's an issue gap. And what he's talking about is about geographical location, the gaps in the little research in this region and as compared to this region. So, good. Is it possible to have all the gaps in the research? Yes, but it depends. It will be too much for you. You may see all of them, but you may address a combination of two. And we'll come to it as we go and I'll show you. And there could be the primary gap, which can be issue. But as you are addressing the issue, you may come across a theory gap or another type of gap. That could also happen. There could be a primary gap, and as you are addressing that gap, another type of gaps may come up. Okay. Very, very good question. Amarachi and then Elvis. Okay, thank you very much. And if you have to, thank you very much. So let's continue. Okay, so let's look at this example. This paper is a paper on triggers of entrepreneurship among creative consumers, published in the Journal of Business Research, volume 92. And I'm reading from the abstract because this is quite interesting. For the first time, I've seen it, the person try to discuss the gap right from the abstract without even going to the introduction. So the gap was mentioned in the abstract and re-echoed in the introduction. So look at this. Let's read the first sentence. While entrepreneurship has received much attention, so it's giving acknowledgement or is giving a complementing the existing research. So whilst entrepreneurship has received much attention, usually this attention is from academic researchers. Little research, you see how it is mentioned. Usually gaps are echoed by or written by or demonstrated by words that show the discrepancies or show that there is something is missing. So little research has focused on end user entrepreneurship, which refers to entrepreneurship by consumers who develop innovative solutions that better answer their daily personal needs. What he's trying to tell us is that there has been a lot of research on entrepreneurship globally, but most research in entrepreneurship do not focus on end user entrepreneurship or consumer entrepreneurship. What he's trying to say is that there is a type of entrepreneurship which is started by a consumer, where a consumer was consuming a product and realized that there's a problem with something he's using and try to solve that problem. And by solving that problem for himself, he ends up creating an enterprise around it. So the student or the consumer never went in with a primary objective of making money. He just chanced into it because he was solving a problem. And most of the time, they don't even grow out of it. he may keep on solving that problem. Let me just give a very common example that you may not know of. You know the mountain bike. Most of you have heard about mountain bike, which are used for driving, riding bikes, riding in mountainous area. It has a lot of gears on it. Now, the mountain bike actually was formulated out of user entrepreneurship. Somebody had a bike and used to go to ride with his friends and realized that sometimes when it comes to mountainous areas, it's very difficult for you to maintain your grip and try to climb and on higher ground and then come down lower ground. So he fixed gears on his bike and started using it. And it was helping. His friends got to know about it and they made him fix some for them. Little did he know, later on it turned into a big enterprise and the whole mountain bike phenomenon was born. So sometimes somebody can start by trying to solve a problem for himself. And by solving the problem for himself, it chances into an enterprise. So while entrepreneurship has received much attention, little research has focused on consumer type of entrepreneurship. That's what he's trying to say. So this exploratory research aims to, because little research has been done. Remember, I told you in the session 1 that whenever you have a research that little has been done in that area, that means that there's opportunity for exploratory research. This exploratory research aims to provide deeper understanding of what motivates consumer entrepreneurs or end user entrepreneurs to start firms or to found firms. So that's what he did. Based on a qualitative study, and usually some exploratory studies like to use a qualitative approach so that they can study a few people and be able to come up with very interesting insights of what is happening. Based on a qualitative study conducted on 20 end user entrepreneurs, our data suggests these three significant factors may lead to consumers to switch to an entrepreneurial role. Okay, I'm not going to read the down part. All I wanted us to do is to identify how the gap was written. The gap was written here. How the gap was written. Little research. So this is the abstract. So let's look at the introduction now. This is the introduction of the paper. I took an extract from the introduction to show you how he wrote his research problem. And he actually tried to echo the need for a research, the particular research area he's going to carry out the research on. He starts by, you see, let me emphasize something here. In trying to write a research problem, you primarily have to draw on existing research. But sometimes people also begin by also emphasizing what we call the background to the research or the problem in practice. So if you look at it very carefully, these two paragraphs, one paragraph is research based, another paragraph 2 is a little bit of industry based. What I mean by industry based, it quotes a lot of research statistics from industry to be able to support the work. So let's read them and see. But it's actually emphasizing there's a gap. So empirical studies, that studies that collected data. So empirical studies have shown that 10.7% of all startups and 46.6% of all innovative startups that survived to their 5th year, created in the United States in 2004, were founded by users. Okay, so let's continue. Now he gives the reference to it. Other studies find that 29% of US-based medical device startups, and then 84% of large and small firms in juvenile products industries were founded by users. Physicians in the first case, that's the US-based medical startups, and then parents and babysitters and givers in the second case. Now, all that he has done here is to emphasize that there is research to show that users start firms, even if it is a small number. The first one was 10%, the next one was 46%, another one was 29%, and the other one was 84%. But they are trying to emphasize that as existing research demonstrates that users have the propensity of starting their own firms. Then he says that over the past 10 years, these empirical patterns highlighted the magnitude and importance of user entrepreneurship for the industrial system. However, as firm founders and end users, in contrast with professional users, remain relatively unexplored by scholars. He said, as firm founders, that's end users, remain relatively unexplored by scholars. even though the Kaufman survey conducted among a sample of 5,000 startups launched in 2004 showed that 40% of user entrepreneurial firms were created by end users. Now, what is he trying to say here? What he's trying to say here that even though this study, 5,000 startups were studied in 2004, launched in 2004, were studied by some authors, that's Shah et al. In 2011. 40% of the firms they studied out of the 5,000 were created by end users. Despite all these statistics, people are still not studying end user entrepreneurship. So he's asking that why are they not studying it? And he's actually pushing that there's a need to study it because he says that this exploratory study focuses exclusively on consumer entrepreneurs and aims to extend our knowledge of this unconventional but growing form of production. So it means that this is not a normal form of production where consumers become entrepreneurs, but it is becoming a phenomenon. There is a growth in it. 40% of 5,000 startups launched in 2004 started are people who started their firms as consumers. So there is a core need for us to do research in that area because nobody is doing it. That's what he's emphasizing here. Nobody is doing that research. So he's emphasizing that a free year, raise your hand. A free year, free year, free year, free year. Wow. Okay, free. Okay. If you can talk, or you don't even have your mic seems not to be working, so you may have to send us a message. It doesn't seem you have a mic. I can't see any mic to you. Okay, so you can ask a question by by typing the question and I'll answer. If you okay, so what else was I trying to say? I was trying to emphasize here that all this particular introduction here emphasizes that there is a phenomenon which is growing, and that phenomenon is that user entrepreneurship is becoming an unconventional means of production, and there is statistics to prove that it's becoming something that American researchers or researchers globally should take advantage to should start giving attention to. And because there are quite a number of users who are starting their firms. And even in this age of social media, it's even becoming much more easier for them to do so. Okay, so let's continue. This paper was published in 2018. Okay. Now, let's look at this. This is another set of gaps. Now, you see, the first one has to do with issue gap. The fact that we don't know much about user entrepreneurship. Now, see how he now moves from an issue gap to a theory gap. Look at what he's saying here. In the field of consumer sporting goods, Shah and Trippers developed a theoretical model. If you are looking at it, for a while, look at it, a theoretical model to explain when creative users decide to found or not found a firm to commercialize their own innovations. So it means that Shah and Tripper developed a model to explain how when creative users start their firms and when they choose not to start a firm. Okay. They identify three factors that accelerate a user innovator's entrepreneurship factors, or three factors that influence a creative user, a consumer, to become an entrepreneur. One, when they have access to complementary assets. Two, when they possess informational advantages, enabling them to uniquely identify opportunities that established firms will underestimate. Three, when rents from the entrepreneurial activity exceed the opportunity cost of their time. So the first one, and when they have complementary assets, when they have assets that can help them to be able to do that, and it may not bring much cost to them. So number two, when they possess information advantages, like the mountain bike guy, he was a biker, and he knew what it is to bike, but through that particular means, he identified that there's an opportunity for him to start. So maybe other people couldn't see that there was an opportunity there, but he could see because of his experiences. Number three, when the rents of the entrepreneurial activity exceed the opportunity cost of their time. when they realize that the time that the effort, the rents or the benefits or the potential value of investing time in exploring this endeavor will be more advantageous to them than if they put their time in any other effort. So that's what I was saying. These are the three reasons that influence the choice of becoming a consumer entrepreneur. Now I said this initial work, that means that Charles and Tripper's work was the initial work to looking at what influences users to become entrepreneurs. So he said this initial works opens a research avenue for further investigation, a gap. He said the work is initial, means that after the work was proposed in 2016, there haven't been much research that have carried out, taking Charles and Tripper's model and tested it. That is why he said this initial work. This initial work opens a research avenue for further investigation. Since the authors, now I point out the gap, since the authors focus on organizational time factors and private factors in the terms of life stages. What he's trying to say here is that the factors that they were looking at in the model was more of organizational time. For example, the time, the cost, the time that they could have used to do something at the organization, now they're using it for something personal. But they didn't look at more of the private time the person may have in terms of the different life stages as the person grows. For example, when women take seed and they are pregnant, sometimes those of them who leave their work come home. Sometimes after staying home for some time, get engaged in some activities, become enterprising or to become an entrepreneur. So by the time she's finished and the child is well of age, by the time maybe about 3 years old, and she wants to go back to work, she has even started her own business while she was at home. So and you see it in Ghana most of the time. Quite a number of people who start these baby companies and selling baby products. Sometimes during the time that they were carrying a baby, they realized there's an opportunity or there was a gap in the market, and they decided buying some particular product for themselves. Then later on, they started turning it into enterprise through social media to sell to others. So that's why you see that sometimes the private time of a person can turn him to become a business person or become an entrepreneur. But Shah and Tripper didn't factor that one in. So he said to extend Shah and Tripper's first assumptions, what they work in, and to explore why creative consumers decide to become entrepreneurs, we aim to answer the following questions. What mechanisms? So that's what he's trying to say. Okay. So let's look at it carefully. I want to take my time to extend Shah and Tripper's assumptions and to explore why creative consumers decide to become entrepreneurs. We aim to answer the following questions. What mechanisms trigger creative consumers to become entrepreneurs? That's one. Number two, what are the pathways of end user entrepreneurship? And number three, what are the more favorable times or periods of life for end users to be undertake entrepreneurial ventures? If you look at the third question, it is addressing the private the private factors that he mentioned earlier, that sometimes people in their private life end up becoming entrepreneurs because of time that they may have. So these are some of the opportunities that the three questions that the person had based on the model. So you see, if you look at it carefully, the first gap was about steady consumer entrepreneurship. That gave us the area to study. The second gap that he has pointed here is now about the theoretical model. If we want to even study consumer entrepreneurship, what theoretical models have been used to study that area already? Is the theoretical model sufficient in explaining the concept and explaining the whys and the reasons and the hows in their particular concept? No. Tripper's and Shah and Tripper's model is just an initial work. So there's a need for somebody to go beyond and extend Shah and Tripper's model. And that is what he's doing. So now the theory gap, the issue gap gave her the area to start the research in. And then the theory gap gave her the research questions. Sometimes that is somebody else say, can I do two types of gap in the same study? Yes, this is how they can come up together. One study may give us the area we want to study, and another gap may also give us a closer look at the issue and what questions should we ask this time. So gaps can be in terms of hierarchy. One giving us, this is very interesting thing. I don't even have it in my book. As I'm teaching you, I'm learning, I'm even getting an epiphany myself. Gaps can come in terms of hierarchy, and I'm going to teach my PhD students. So thank you very much, this class. Gaps can come in terms of hierarchy. One may give you the area that you should look into. Another one can give you what within the area you should look into. That's what it has done. The first gap gave us the area, and the other one, the subsequent gap, the theory gap, gave us the questions we should ask. The questions we should ask. So for a while, we'll take a break. So let's look at the last part. That's the future research direction. He said our research also has limitations that at the end of the paper, the person pointed out some gaps that offer opportunity for future research. First, our central limitation of this survey is that it's focused on only end user and not professional entrepreneurs. Our interviews were conducted with 20 end users who became entrepreneurs. A strong complementary study, that means that somebody can do a similar study and by replicating the same qualitative survey with 2 samples. Now, what he's trying to say that future studies can do the same study. Use my question, don't change my questions. Use the same questions I use, but use 2 different samples. One should be an end user, and one should be a professional end user. One should be a consumer user. So another one should be a professional entrepreneur. So you have a consumer entrepreneur and a professional entrepreneur to establish a comparison between those both entrepreneurship processes. This is what we call a method gap. Change the respondents. Use 2 different samples. So that's a method gap here. Now, second, current research, including ours, analyzes end user entrepreneur as exposed. Exposed means that he studies entrepreneurship after the person has achieved becoming an entrepreneur. So a deeper understanding and report could be made using ethnographic and longitudinal methodologies that are appropriate to explore an ongoing process. What he's trying to say that it will be interesting that people who want to do research on entrepreneurship, especially this particular type of entrepreneurship in future, should look at the study as don't wait till the person becomes an entrepreneur, then go and look for despite I want to study you. Look for a person who is actually now becoming that budding celebrated entrepreneur. The person at the beginning stages. That's why I say longitudinal and ethnographic. Work with the person, take your time and study the person over the years and see how the person grows. Because he said that he emphasizes that as an ongoing process, as well as a quantitative methods to identify interesting entrepreneurship patterns and determinants, such as age, gender, education, and work trajectory. So he's emphasizing here that some things can change, and those things can change as the time goes on. So there could be differences as you study people who are becoming entrepreneurs as we on a trajectory, on the longitudinal dimension, instead of just waiting and when they are fresh, when exposed, when they are becoming entrepreneur, they come and study them. Don't do that. So these 2 gaps are all method gaps. He goes on to let me see the final. Finally, many of our informants reveal that they do not consider themselves as entrepreneurs. This certainly indicates a deep identity opposition between consumer and consumer and entrepreneur. That merits research attention. What is he trying to say? He said that people they interview, even though they are now entrepreneurs, they don't see themselves as entrepreneurs. They still see themselves as consumers who are just doing things for themselves. They don't see themselves as entrepreneurs. That has an identity issue. So he's trying to just tell you that future research can look at how the entrepreneur, who is a consumer entrepreneur, identifies himself in the entrepreneurship cycle. He doesn't even see himself as an entrepreneur. And because he doesn't see himself as an entrepreneur, maybe certain risks he will not take. That can even affect how he does his business. And most of you can attest to this. Most of your friends who are doing the thing as home business, sometimes you see that they don't take sound business principle in doing their bookkeeping, in doing the right thing, and even trying to maximize value. They just sell the thing as they get opportunity, and they get some money. Sometimes they don't even reinvest. They just spend the money, then they look for another money to buy and sell again. So it's just being seen as a hobby. They don't ever see themselves as entrepreneur, but they are in the entrepreneurship game, but they don't see themselves as. So there are a number of questions that can come up here. This one too is related to both issue and method gap, the nature of the respondent, how he sees himself, and how the concept about entrepreneurship, and then the consumer entrepreneurship. So if he has asked that we should take a 5-minute break, and we'll come back at 8:10. And those of you who are online, you can still ask me questions. So we'll take a 5-minute break now and continue at 8:10. So I'm unmuting all of you so that if you have questions, you can ask. Okay, so you're asking what's the relation between gaps and the topic and the topic or title of the subsequent work. Don't worry. I'm going to mention that. I'm going to discuss that. Actually, when you have your gap, that is when you need someone to build your research purpose and to lead to shaping your research title. So it happens. Let's look at another example. We just finished the one on triggers of entrepreneurship among creative consumers. Now let's look at a different example. This is about unemployment. So let's look at how the person conceptualizes the research gap. While there has been some research on the general impact of female unemployment, little research has been written on the effect of pitch closure on women's lives. Now, here you see a research issue being emphasized, but then they go ahead to discuss a gap. That means that there's a need for research on the effect of pitch closure on women's life. Pitch closure has to do with the mining industry or the extractive industry. So what is trying to emphasize here is that we have not studied the effect of closing down a pit on women's life or on employment opportunities for women. Or when you go to extractive industry, after a pit has exhausted its resource, the pit is closed. And when you close the pit, it means that economic activity which was stemmed by the pit or which was initiated by the pit or that support the pit's existence and the people who work on the pit just ceases because that pit has been closed. And as soon as the pit is closed, the economic activities cease. And when they cease, it has an effect on the employment opportunities for the women who are working in that particular enclave. So what it's trying to emphasize here is that people study the general impact on female unemployment, but they have not looked at how the closure of pits affect female unemployment or employment opportunities for female. So future research should do a research on that. That's what it's trying to say. So you have somebody who say, but Prof, the way it's like now a domain gap, because now looking at it in the coal mining sector. So it's more about the sector gap, and we don't know much about unemployment for females in the sector gap, especially when the pits are closed. Yeah, somebody can argue from that point, but you have an issue gap that is dependent on even a particular industry in terms of the gap that he has pointed out here. Okay, so now let's look at a different example. Okay, so the next example has to do with, good, social networking in public sector in Mexico. Now look at the title, social networking in public sector in Mexico. Okay, the actual title of the paper is Understanding the Risk, Benefits and Strategic Alternatives of Social Media Application in the Public Sector. Okay, so now let's read what he has here. The actual title is here. Those of you can ask wonder where I was reading it from. The actual title is coming from the paper itself is here. The actual title is here. So let me see if I can highlight it. Okay. So understanding risk, benefits, and strategic alternatives of social media applications in the public sector. When I finish, we'll come back to the actual title. So it starts by talking about certain things on social networking in public sector in Mexico. It began by saying the adoption of social media by government confronts series of barriers. This is not specific to any government, but you just looking at different research. Now, after making that argument, he needs to substantiate the argument. So he goes on to say, some of these barriers relate to records management, privacy and security issues, accuracy and administration-specific requirements. So he outlines the gaps, the barriers, and gives references for that. Now he has to illustrate the references. So you see that he's going to do the first one. As social media includes two-way communications. The risk of inserting malware in government websites exists. Method et al. See, method was already here. So, yeah, so IT people, so the IT people should be prepared to protect government information technology infrastructure. Okay, he said social media use in government um, suffers from the risk of malware. That's a type of virus being put into government websites. So security is a matter of concern. Security of the government infrastructure is a matter of concern. That's what he's saying. Now let's go and continue. Government that would like to implement social media need to verify if people in charge of updating the media will have the time to update the new communication channel. They also need to answer questions such as what to post, how and when often they will update. Now, this is all things concerning administration specific requirements, how to administrate the social media platform. The lack of resources and procedures could undermine the accuracy of information posted on social media. Okay. Now look at where the gap is coming from. So you're saying that all these barriers exist. So if you are going to put social networking in the public sector, you should be concerned about these barriers. Despite that, he says that although the use of social media in Mexican state portals is recent, when something is recent, it means that it has not yet gained maturity. It's not gaining maturity. It's recent. The development of relationships between government and citizens is going fast. That even though social media use in government websites and portals is recent, there's a growing relationship between government and citizens. Then he goes on to say, however, in contrast with other countries, as soon as you see the word in contrast with other countries, you are pointing to what? A geographic location. It means that it's more about what? A context gap. In contrast with other countries, there is, to our knowledge, there is still no guideline for the use of social media in Mexico. What is he trying to say? He's trying to emphasize here that the current research there's currently in practice, some of the countries that may be surrounding Mexico have already developed guidelines for the use of social media in the public sector. But when you come to Mexico, Mexico doesn't have it. So in contrast with other countries, while some countries have it, Mexico doesn't have it. The study of perceived risk, benefits, and strategies will be helpful in the development of those guidelines. Now let's check the interesting argument placed in the last statement. That is the purpose of the study. The study said that the gentleman concluded by saying that the study of perceived risk, benefits, and strategies will be helpful in the development of those guidelines. Note it carefully that he didn't say he's going to develop the guidelines. He's rather going to study the risk, benefits, and strategies that will be helpful in developing the guidelines. This is one of the things that you're asking me, that when you define a gap, do you address everything? The gap he found out was there's a need for guidelines for social media in Mexico. But he says he's going to only answer a part of the gap. A part of the gap is that he's going to look at the risks and benefits and strategies that will be helpful for the development of those guidelines. He didn't say developing the guidelines. He's going to just study some of the issues that can be considerations for developing the guidelines. And if you look at it, look at the title of the work, Understanding the Risks and Benefits and Strategic Alternatives of Social Media Applications in the Public Sector. So that it becomes the bedrock for developing the guideline. What I'm trying to emphasize here is that sometimes you can find a gap, but you can choose not to address the full gap, but you can describe an aspect of the gap, especially with the limits of time for a long essay, which is sometimes 4 months or 5 months. I mean, sometimes it can be shorter, depending on when you ended up getting your chapter proposal accepted. So you have a very short time to do this long essay. So you can't even do longitudinal approaches in your work. It means that you have to choose which aspect of the gap you want to address. You can find so many gaps, but which aspect of the gap do you want to address? Do you want to address all the gaps that you found, or a combination of two of them, or an aspect of just one of them? This gentleman here is just going to address an aspect of just one of them. And it's even, the aspect is necessary because if you don't look at the perceived risk, the previous paragraph, this one, the perceived risks and the strategies that are needed, you might not be, or the administrative strategies that are needed to manage social media, you might not be able to develop the appropriate guidelines. So that is what is emphasizing here. Okay, so let's continue to another one. Gaps may be communicated as missing issues in the literature, limited discussion in the literature, conflicts in the theoretical approach, missing theoretical model, conflicts in empirical methods, mixed previous empirical results, less contextual evaluation or geographic representation, or a complex gap, a mixture of these, the above, or the absence of some of them, mixture or absence of the above. Okay. Where do you find gaps? Gaps are usually found in the introduction of a journal article, sometimes even in the abstract and introduction at the same time. And at the end, those at the beginning of an article focus on why it is important to read that article and establish the gaps in previous research and points out the focus of the journal article, like we saw in the paper on triggers of consumer entrepreneurship. Those at the end of the article focus on discussing the implication and findings of the research and points out the gaps for future research. This is important for researchers to find out the gaps pointed out by previous researchers. So I showed that one in the beginning of the session when I showed you using the stakeholder communication paper. And I've also shown you the same thing using the paper by the paper on triggers of entrepreneurship among creative consumers. We have also seen that there. Okay, now let's look at another one. This is a paper that I wrote with one of my PhD students, Organizational Adoption of Telecommuting, Evidence from a Developing Country. Okay, now let's look at it very carefully. As earlier stated, the paradigm shift from the traditional way of work to telecommuting, where employees remotely perform their tasks outside the place of work, which is in accordance with regulations of their firms, has attracted a lot of studies on the phenomenon. These studies have been conducted. So he first of all pointed out that a lot of research studies have been done on telecommuting. These telecommuting studies have been conducted from several dimensions. It's giving complement. Usually, people start gaps by complementing what has been done before they point out the gap. That is a very honorable way of pointing out the gap. You complement what has been done, then you point out the gap. Okay, so these empirical studies have been conducted from several dimensions. One of the dimensions is the technological dimension, where research was made into specific technological infrastructure and skills needed to implement and operate telecommuting. Also, there is a societal dimension where society studies have been conducted into increasing the sustainability by reducing carbon emissions and also reducing dependence on fuel imports. Okay. Then it says, furthermore, these studies from the dimensions of employees and productivity were conducted to establish the relationship between increased productivity as a result of teleworking. Okay. And then it goes on to say, even though now it's pointed out that there are three dimensions. One is the technological dimension, another one is the societal or environmental dimension, another one is organizational dimension, where it looks into employee productivity. Okay, so let's pause a little bit. The gaps have not been pointed out yet, but what he has done is to tell us what has been done. What has been done is that there has been research on the technological dimension. Look at the technological infrastructure and skills needed for telecommuting. Number two, you look at the societal dimension or the environmental dimension, which has looked into sustainability by reducing carbon emissions. Number three, you can look at the organizational dimension, which is looking into employees and productivity, relationship between increased productivity as a result of what teleworking. Now, let's continue. He said, even though, now you see the gap is coming, even though telecommuting has been a growing phenomenon in more advanced world, that's in the developed world. Can you see a context gap coming? Good. I know you can see that. In a more advanced world, over the past 2 decades, businesses in Africa, context again, and more specifically West Africa, are yet to adopt the practice. So this one is telling you that even that telecommuting has been a growing phenomenon, even in the industry, in more advanced world in the past 2 decades. Businesses in Africa and specifically West Africa are yet to adopt their practice. Then he goes on to say there's no gainsaying that. It cannot be argued, or there's no gainsaying that telecommuting provides businesses and employees with benefits such as workforce empowerment, employee job flexibility, and increased productivity. Yet, The reasons are not readily forthcoming. Oh my, he's asking that the reasons are not yet readily forthcoming. We don't know why. The reasons are not readily forthcoming as to why businesses and even governments in West Africa, and more specifically Ghana, have not taken advantage of it. Interesting. So you see that he's pointing out another gap. This one has to do with the fact that it's all about domain context gap, that he doesn't understand that even despite all the benefits of teleworking or telecommuting, businesses and even governments in West Africa have not, so you have got domains coming, businesses and governments in West Africa, and more specifically Ghana, have not yet taken advantage of it. Hence, the study seeks to investigate theoretical context. The technological, sorry, the study seeks to investigate the technological, environmental, and organizational factors that influence telecommuting adoption, using Ericsson Ghana as a case study, and also examine the potential benefits of adopting telecommuting in the operations of Ericsson Ghana. Okay, so you see what he says he's going to do. He's going to investigate the technological, the environmental, and the organizational factors. Look at what we said in the beginning. In the beginning, we said that the studies have been done in the technological, environmental, or societal, and organizational. So he's going to look at this study has not been done in Ghana, so have been done in developing countries or done in Ghana. So he's going to explore, and in his exploration, he's going to look at the technological, the environmental, and the organizational factors that influence telecommunity adoption using Ericsson Ghana. Interesting contribution here. So he found the gap, which was a context gap, even though he had an issue in mind, and then realized that he needed to address it. But before he could say, he could actually start, he pointed out which factors he's going to even examine, not just say that I'm going to examine telecommuting, but what are you going to examine about telecommuting? He stated it out there. Okay. So how then does the thing become your title, your contribution, your topic? Now, if you go back, look at something. Organization adoption of telecommuting, evidence from a developing country. It's the same thing that he's saying here. Organizational adoption of telecommuting. So why Ericsson Ghana has adopted telecommuting? Evidence from a developing country. Developing country is Ghana. Okay. So the topic is your area of research or the phenomenon of study. But your title then becomes your topic plus the context plus the contribution, and sometimes plus the population. Population is the given people within a given particular sector or context or scope that you want to focus your study on. So let's continue. It says that how then do you determine contribution? Contribution is term coming from the gaps, either based on the outcome of the study, the methodology you are going to use, the complexity of the analytical technique, the nature of the variables, like you tell multi-dimensional variables or multi-dimensional constructs. I mentioned that earlier. And then the outcome of the study. The outcome of the study. So those are the ones I use to show contribution. So hence, let's look at an example again. Contribution comes from where? Outcome, nature, complexity, methodology, and novelty. What I also want to emphasize here is that the topic title, the long essay title, is topic plus context and contribution, and sometimes plus the population. So let's take it one by one and use our formula to analyze it. To be corrupt or not to be corrupt, understanding the behavioral side of corruption in Indonesia. The topic is corruption. The context is Indonesia, but the contribution is the behavioral side, that subset that he has picked up. Strategic responses of foreign subsidiaries to host country corruption. The case of Finnish firms in Russia. The study is in Russia, that's the context, but the study's phenomenon is trying to study is corruption, but more about host country corruption. And then he's taking a particular angle or perspective on it so that can contribute something on foreign subsidiaries and how they respond to host country corruption. That's all. Okay. Institutions and entrepreneurship, the mediating role of corruption. This one, there's no context. But you can see that the topic is on corruption, but he's focusing on how corruption becomes a mediator between institutions and then entrepreneurship. Okay. Then corruption, firm growth, and export propensity in Kenya. So how does corruption affect firm growth and ability to your export propensity? The context is in Kenya. The topic is corruption, but the contribution is coming from the two variables that is looking into the nature of the variables, the firm growth and export propensity. Those are the angles it's coming from. Okay, then corruption and control, a corruption reduction approach. So you can see that there's no country here as context, but there is a reduction approach. The reduction approach can be the contribution. And then the corruption is still the title. Corruption in the agricultural sector, micro level evidence from Bangladesh. I told you that there's level of gap, level of analysis gap. So the topic is corruption. The context is going to be Bangladesh. The scope is going to be the agricultural sector. But he's looking at the micro level evidence. So he's looking at the micro level. He's not concerned about the macro level evidence, micro level evidence. Then re-understanding corruption in the Indonesian public sector, 2-3 behavioral lenses. Okay, so corruption is the topic, Indonesia is the title, the domain is the public sector, and then all the population will come from the public sector. And then you have the contribution being the 3 behavioral lenses. The behavioral lens is the contribution. Okay. So how do you create a research title? When you have a business problem, you can have 1,001 research problems to be able to address it, which I mentioned earlier. So when you have a business problem, you can then conceptualize a business problem by searching it for it in academic databases, like decline employee productivity, and searching it in Google Scholar. You come up with so many examples, and this example will lead you to your gaps, and then your gaps then will lead you to coming back again to do your purpose and then rephrase your topic, your title. Okay. Determine the scope and contribution. So the scope can be that you can study one part of an organization, compare several parts of or functions of an organization, study one organization, comparing 2 or more organizations, and studying a sector or an industry. Those can be the scope. Okay. How the contribution, we talked about it earlier. So now let's see how they combine the scope and then the contribution and then the topic. How do they combine? Look at this one. We are looking at and women entrepreneurship and motivation. So look at it. Let's examine it. First of all, women entrepreneurship in Asian developing countries. They are developing the main constraint. The topic is women entrepreneurship. The context is Asian developing countries. The issue of study is their development and main constraints. That's what she's trying to explore. So that's where the contribution would come from. Entrepreneurship and SMEs in Ethiopia. The role, prospects, and problems faced by women in the emerging sector. The topic is entrepreneurship, even particularly women entrepreneurship, and then exploring a particular domain that's SMEs. Is trying to evaluate role, prospect, and problems, which is more about the potential contribution that he wants to contribute. Women entrepreneurship in Middle East. Context is Middle East. Topics women entrepreneurship. The issue is more and then becomes more about the contribution. He's going to explore the barriers and the use of ICT in women entrepreneurship development. So he's looking at these two. Understanding barriers and use of ICT. Women entrepreneurship in small service firms. Motivation, barriers, and performance. The small service firms is even interesting to an area to contribute from. The topic is women entrepreneurship. There's no context here. It could be an American paper. Critical factors of women entrepreneurship development in rural Bangladesh. Very specific. The context is rural Bangladesh. The topic is women entrepreneurship. And then look at critical factors as the contribution. Women in entrepreneurial motivations are determinants of women entrepreneurship challenges. The topic is women entrepreneurship. The context he has not mentioned here for us, but he emphasizes here more about entrepreneurial motivation, which is going to be the contribution. So now we have all of these things outlined. Okay. So identify the broad topic in academic discipline, determine the scope, you conduct a preliminary literature review and write the research problem. And when you finish writing the research problem, you end up defining your research purpose. That will lead to your questions and your objectives. Okay. Then you go back to revise your topic so that it fits with your title, or create a title that fits your purpose and questions that you have. Like you saw, the triggers of entrepreneurship among critical consumers. The title and then the first question, we're having a relationship. Okay. Now, to be able to do all of these things I've said, we need to know how to be able to study the literature and then write. Studying the literature means that looking out in the literature for what is relevant and what is not relevant. So I told you to download papers. And downloading the papers, you can look at it from different perspectives. Last week, I told you that when you download the papers, you can look at the abstract. Usually, when you do the abstract and you are looking at the abstract alone, you are saying you are doing a telescopic study where you are looking to get a holistic picture of the paper that has been published. You can look at the abstract for a holistic paper, or you can just skim through without reading any particular section into detail to get an idea of what has been a holistic answer to what has been published or has been shared in the paper. Okay. Then we also have a topical study when you focus on a particular topic and search for literature based on the topic, like what we did last week. That's the topical study. Now, usually when you finish downloading all these plain papers and then you start writing, there comes a time that you have to write like definition of corruption. And to be able to look at the definition of corruption, you have to look at the different aspects of corruption. We usually call that one a microscopic study, where you focus on the statement and analyze each of the words in the statement to understand the statement. Called a microscopic study. You break down a particular, like when we're studying literature review, I said literature review is a synthesis of available resources and materials which have a strong relation to the topic in question. And I started explaining what the synthesis is, what the strong relation is, what the available materials are. And all of it was trying to establish what literature review is, and it's a microscopic study. Okay. Then sometimes some students do what we call an author or character study. They find one author like Professor Abo, who has published on small business financing, and they want to know all the other good papers on small business financing from a Ghana perspective. They start Googling that person, the name of the person more, so that all the papers on small business financing that he has, they can come to use to be done the work. Like you can use it to do your work. You can use it to study the different issues and how he changes view over time. So character study or author study matters. Sometimes students are encouraged to do author study of their own supervisors so that you know what your supervisor has done. You can put part of his work in your work when you are finishing. Okay, or when you are even writing up. Then geographic study, when you want to look at all papers that come from a geographic region, developing countries, Africa, or a particular sector, or a particular context. Just looking at that context, Europe, all the papers on addiction from Europe, all the papers from addiction from the US, all the papers on addiction from Africa. So you can look at it from that perspective. So what author study, telescopic study, microscopic study, topical study, and geographic study. Now, I just want to say that this one brings us to the end of today's session. Because of time, I'm getting to 8:40. Our class will go 6:30 to 8:30. We can't continue and do the writing, how to write research. But that's a very interesting thing that is our advice that you should need to know and learn. But I have a video in which I taught another class the same video and the same how to write research. I'll put that video and this video after it has been edited on the platform so that you can watch ahead of time. So by next week, we'll start going to how to write. Now we have learned how to select a topic. We have learned how to search for literature. We have learned how to be able to coin a research title out of the topic that we have. Next thing that we are going to do is to do how to write academically. That's what we'll try to learn. Thank you very, very much. I want to take your questions. Any questions you have, I want to take your questions.
Second May, the following one.